I, uh, I hope everybody had a nice break. And as we know, explorers like to talk and tell stories. So we're going to get on with the program. You know, throughout this, wait a second. You know, we've been hearing a lot about Magellan and Elcano, and obviously history has some strange but true facts. And so everybody knows that Magellan was born in Portugal, but he also sailed under a Spanish flag. And because we're in an era of inclusivity, I did want to recognize that we did have some friends from the Spanish Navy come here to celebrate with us. They'll stand right now. But here's an interesting fact that many of you may not know, that His Royal Highness King Felipe VI actually went on an Explorers Club flag expedition when he was only a prince to Easter Island. So our roots with Spain and your king go to Easter Island. So it's this web that keeps pushing together. All right, I don't know how many of you walked behind us during the break, but you saw the beautiful stone floors. Well, I visited this venue about 3 months ago when we were first discussing it. And what does an explorer notice? Fossils everywhere. And so, of course, I take a picture of it and I text it across the Atlantic to Dr. Kenneth Lacavera, who's, you know, not only a really great friend, but a preeminent paleontologist. And in true Dr. Ken form, he sends me his answers back in a flash. Part of the joy of coming to events like this are the friendships that we have. It's great exchanging information across disciplines, but also friends. You know, I've seen Ken play his drums. A lot of people don't realize he's actually a jazz drummer. He's a carpenter. I've seen the tree house he built in his backyard for his son. So Dr. Ken is a man of many amazing talents. Many of you probably heard of him first for one of his discoveries, and that is the Dreadnoughtus. We mentioned just before the break that if you were to measure that Dreadnoughtus, it would go all the way from the back of the room to the front. This year, Dr. Kenneth Lacavera also received the highest award from the Explorers Club, the Explorers Medal. I'd like everybody to give a warm welcome to my friend, Dr. Kenneth Lacavera.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Portugal, for your amazing hospitality. Thank you, Richard and Anne, for this incredible event. I agree with Bertrand. I hope this is the first of many. This is just wonderful. So I'm going to tell you about a place where I spent about 10 years working, Fin del Mundo, the bottom of South America, the bottom of Patagonia, Argentina. And I work in an area there that's about the size of the state of Connecticut in the United States. And within that area, there's only 3 houses. And this is one of them. This is owned by my friend Gaucho Ramon, who catches and breaks horses to make a living. And from our excavation site there, you can see the spine of the Andes. And every day we see Andean condors. These are the largest flying birds. They have a 9-foot wingspan. And they're scavengers, of course. So you can get pictures like this if you lay down in the desert and pretend to be dead. So how do you find fossils? Well, you get yourself in the right geological circumstance. That means rocks of the right age, that are sedimentary rocks, that are exposed in a desert. And if you have those conditions and you get yourself on the ground and you walk, chances are very good that you will find fossils. And as you look at this picture here, every pebble that you see on the ground there is a piece of dinosaur bone. And so we went down to this site for the first time in 2004. I was just coming off a project in Egypt where we discovered the world's second largest dinosaur. And I thought that maybe this site in Patagonia would allow us to do better. And so in that first field season, I found this. That's a 2.2-meter femur, a thigh bone, of a giant dinosaur, 7 feet 1 inch long. And unfortunately, that bone was isolated. We dug and dug around there. There wasn't anything else, but we had another site that year, which was up on top of this mountain. Had some very big bones. They had mostly turned to iron, so they were very heavy. And so I knew we would need a helicopter to get these bones out of there. So I went to the Argentinian Air Force. I explained my situation. The general, to my surprise, said see. The pilot said see, the cargo master said see, but then I found out actually on the day of extraction that there wasn't going to be a helicopter, and I would have to come up with plan B. And plan B was to raft our supplies across this raging glacial stream, to hire 2 gauchos and 2 teams of horses to haul thousands of pounds of burlap and plaster up to the top of this mountain, where we would jacket the bones in plaster. I built a wooden stretcher. We'd carry the bones to this slope. I went into town 4 hours away and had a welder make me a metal toboggan. We'd lash the bones to the toboggan. I belayed them around my hip down to this gully where we had to clear out a 2-mile path of basalt boulders and then hitch them onto another wagon, another sled, pad it out with prairie grass, and tow the bones out into the desert that way. That was a pretty hard field season that I actually didn't want to repeat. So when we went back down the next year, I knew that if we were going to be successful, we couldn't just access the site by raft. We were going to have to build a road. So we spent the first week building a 15-kilometer-long road into the site. It wasn't a good road, but it was a road. And then once we got settled, my first morning out of the tent that year, I find this, another 2-meter femur. Only this time not isolated. This time the thigh bone connected to the shin bone, and you know how that goes. And after 4 more field seasons excavating down there, we had about 145 bones of this giant plant-eating dinosaur. I spent a lot of time down there. I spent several birthdays. This is my 45th birthday down there. I spent a total of a year living in that tent in that location. And in fact, I was in this tent on January 19th, 2006, and I was having a very different day that day than our next speaker, Alan Stern, who was having this day at that very moment. And so here you see the ulna, the lower arm bone of this great beast. Here's the scapula, the shoulder blade. Look how big that is. Allison here, she's a tall woman. That is a huge shoulder blade. Here you see the tail of this animal as it starts to emerge from the rock, and eventually the quarry comes to look like this. And there you see the tail of that great beast wrapping around me, and we begin to jacket and extract these bones. Here's that big femur that I first found, and we're covering it with burlap and plaster. To save money and time, I learned to drive the front end loader, which I always say is the most fun a professor can have. I love driving this thing. And here you can see us extracting the femur of this giant animal. Here is about a third of the tail inside this jacket here. Now this jacket, this is a single vertebra in its neck. It would have 17 of these in its neck. Just imagine how big this creature is. Here's a bucket of ribs for you, Patagonia style. And eventually, we got all our permits in order, and we got this shiny new Hamburg Sud shipping container, and we put 16 tons of plaster-jacketed bones inside there, sent it by sea to the port of Philadelphia, and I had this material in my lab for 5 years, where we carefully opened up the jackets, cleaned off the rocks, stabilized the bones, studied the bones, 3D scanned the bones, and it turns out to be a new genus and species of giant plant-eating dinosaur. And this dinosaur, from snout to tail, it was 26 meters, that's 85 feet. It was about 2.5 stories at the shoulder, and all fleshed out in life, it would have weighed as much as 13 African elephants, as much as 9 T-Rex. It was about 10 tons heavier than a Boeing 737, a titanic beast. And if you're that big, what have you to fear? And so I named this animal Dreadnoughtus, meaning fears nothing. And we got a shocker when we cut into the bones of Dreadnoughtus and looked at the bone cells in a thin section under the microscope. We could see that when this 65-ton animal died, It wasn't done growing. It was growing fast at the time of its death. So we don't really know how big these animals can get. And so I want to broaden this out. Why do we go to places like this and dig up giant dinosaurs or ancient hominids or trilobites or anything? Why do we study the ancient past? It was the American bank robber, Willie Sutton. When he was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where the money is, right? Well, why do we study the ancient past? Well, that's where the data are. The future is nothing. The future is just this little wisp of time. The sentence I am speaking right now is already in your future. The past, I'm sorry. Doesn't work that way. It's already in your past. The present sentence is already in your past. The future, we don't have access to, do we? We can do no experiments in the future. Nobody remembers the future. The future is like this dark scrim that always races ahead of us, always obscuring how the universe will dispose of our hopes and dreams and prayers and desire. It's only the past that we have access to. The past is under our feet. It's in the hills. We can pick it up. We can hold it in our hands. We can crack it open. We can put it in a museum for all to see. Winston Churchill said, the further back you look, the further ahead you can see. And for all of us that study the past, the geologists, the paleontologists, the planetary scientists, we all know the same lesson. If you learn the language of the rocks will speak to you. And wherever you are, it could be on Pluto, it could be on Earth, the rocks will say the same thing. They will whisper to you. It didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this particular way. There are an infinite number of histories that we could have had, just like there are an infinite number of futures that we could have. It's all so contingent. And the rock record teaches us this over and over. You go back to the Cambrian period, 500 million years ago, and you see this little wormy thing. It's about 1.5 centimeters long, called Pikaia. Well, if Pikaia doesn't make it out of the Cambrian, there will be no vertebrate animals. There will never be dinosaurs, never whales, never camels, never wombats, never humans, never you or you or you, if Pikaia fails. Nudge that space rock an infinitesimal degree to the left or the right, and it misses the Earth by a wide margin on the day that the dinosaurs died. Mammals evolved just a little bit after dinosaurs, and they could never really get anywhere. They lived in the hidden and forgotten recesses of the dinosaur world, hoping never to be noticed, until the space rock hits and clears the playing field. If this thing doesn't hit the Earth, well, we're not here today. Kill off this strange wolf-like creature along the southern shores of Pakistan 38 million years ago, and today, there are no whales. Shift the winds one way or another across northern Africa 6 million years ago, and humans evolve or do not evolve, as forests turn to grasslands or not. The contingencies are endless and mind-boggling, an infinite kaleidoscope of things and events interacting with one another in ways that we may never fully understand. Everything matters. And the more I contemplate the improbability of my existence and of your existence, the more gratitude I feel for being alive and for being human and for living now in this amazing age of wondrous technology and ever-expanding understanding. You know, we're all freaks of nature, us species. Worlds don't have to have humans any more than they have to have dinosaurs. We're not the recipients of some cosmic proclamation of manifest destiny. We got lucky. And being lucky is a great feeling, but it should lead, I think, to gratitude, not pride. And now we are the masters of this new age, and we have become the asteroid. We're despoiling this planet by using the atmosphere as our trash can. We're warming the globe, we're raising the seas, we're acidifying the oceans, killing the coral reefs, and we're crashing the biodiversity of the planet. The past matters because the future matters. And the past tells us that the future is guaranteed to no one. We have to work for it. We have to fight for it. The fossil record instructs us that we need to come together to take care of this tiny, fragile lifeboat in space, the only home we've ever known. Thank you.
You know, I mentioned that part of the great thing about being at the Explorers Club are relationships. And Ken, I'd like you to stay here because I know that the next speaker is your good friend as well as many of ours. So please do us the honor of going from back in history to the edge of the universe.
I would love to. And so now I get the opportunity to introduce my good friend, Alan Stern. And you probably know Alan from the New Horizons mission to Pluto and beyond. But what you may not know is that Alan is also deeply involved in commercial space ventures. And he's quite the entrepreneur and really an inspiration for me. I've never seen anybody more driven and determined than Alan Stern. Alan's the former executive consultant for Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and SpaceX, and he's a board member of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which I'm pretty sure is something in Star Trek. The Magellan of Pluto, the Lewis and Clark of the Kuiper Belt, the most far-out guy you're ever going to meet, Alan Stern.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for saying that. Well, as Richard said, we're now going to go from deep time to near space. Let me get the clicker. And we're already on slide 1. That's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about something that's in that future that Ken just talked to you about. It's just in our immediate future, and that's the development of commercial human spaceflight and the democratization of spaceflight. Spaceflight, which will go from what was rare to what will be routine very shortly, with an access revolution that's going to blow your doors off. Let me ask a question that was already asked, and let me ask a new question. Earlier this morning, Richard asked, how many people in the room have flown in space? Would you please raise your hand if you've flown in space? I see one hand of several hundred people. Now for a new question. How many people in this room want to fly in space? It's unanimous. That's why you're here at Glex, I'm sure. Well, listen, I'm going to talk to you about that. And let me start by saying, as explorers, we like to use technology to our advantage to do our exploration. And it's something that's been around a long time. We've used these tools like Magellan used shipping and navigation. Almost as soon as the airplane was invented, explorers started to use airplanes to explore the upper atmosphere and then to see our Earth in a new way. And then spaceflight was developed. But unlike the revolution in airplanes, it went more slowly. And it was hard for the average person to be involved in it the way that my grandfather could fly in airplanes only 15 years after the Wright brothers. Even when the amazing machine, the space shuttle, was developed, and you'll shortly hear more about that from David, access was limited, particularly for researchers. Hundreds of astronauts flew on the space shuttle, but how many civilians? How many researchers got to actually take their research out into space in the way that geologists make field expeditions everywhere on this planet, even to the poles? And oceanographers go to the deepest parts of the ocean. And other scientists explore in other ways, but space access was always limited. That's changing. Investors are now creating space lines that will give access to near space to anyone who can afford to buy a ticket, or anyone who wants to do research who can write a good research grant for doing it. The first of these that I want to talk to you about, these new space lines, is called Virgin Galactic. And it's a part of the Virgin Group that Richard Branson, of course, Sir Richard Branson, is so famous for. Virgin Galactic is building this flight system. It consists of an airplane that carries a small spacecraft up into the stratosphere, releases the spacecraft, which then undergoes about 90 seconds of powered flight on an arcing trajectory up to the very edge of space. The airplane is called White Knight 2, after its predecessor, White Knight 1, that pioneered this technique. The spaceship is called Spaceship 2, after its predecessor, Spaceship 1, that pioneered this technique. And these aren't cartoons, they're not on the drawing board, these vehicles are in test. In fact, they've been in test for a number of years and they're wrapping up their test flight programs. They're getting close to commercial service. They've tested glide flight, powered flight, and flight to the edge of space. The Virgin Galactic system on Spaceship 2 can carry up to 6 passengers or researchers on the vehicle along with its flight crew of 2. And I'd like to show you a video now of their most recent test flight. Pretty cool. But Branson's not alone. This guy, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, has created his own space company for suborbital space flight and also orbital space flight. It's called Blue Origin. This is their flight system. It's very different. It's a rocket with a capsule on top. So it flies more conventionally than a carrier aircraft and a winged spaceship. But it does the same thing. It will take people and payloads and researchers and educators up to the edge of space, and will do so very shortly. They're also in test flight. Blue Origin has been flying flights now for more than 4 years with their new flight system called New Shepard, and I'm going to show you a video of one of their recent flights, which is equally cool. Here it is.
Command start, 2, 1, 0. And liftoff. New Shepard has cleared the tower. Throttle down from execute. Separation. Apogee, 333,000 feet. Start, we have thrust. 1,000 feet. Landing gear deploying. And touchdown.
told you it was equally cool. Well, at the Southwest Research Institute, where I work, we like to consider ourselves pioneers and early adopters, and we like to consider ourselves explorers. And we are, in fact, the first private corporation in the world, a research nonprofit, that has actually purchased seats on these vehicles to conduct research. This is my research team, myself, Dr. Kathy Olkin, and Dr. Dan Durda, who will be the payload specialists on these missions starting the year after next. We've already built the experiments that do microgravity, biomedical, and astronomical research, and we've already undergone a whole variety of different training for spaceflight: altitude chambers, centrifuges, flight and high performance, high G aircraft, zero G aircraft. We're ready to go. And those space lines are also almost ready to go. Exploration rocks, and now you, just as I, can help explore space. Isn't the future fantastic? Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lindy Elkins-Tanton, and it is my honor right now to introduce Dr. Dave Williams. Dr. Dave Williams is an astronaut, I think you all know. He's also an aquanaut, he's a jet pilot, he's an ER doctor, and he's Canadian. And he holds the record for the number of spacewalks. He is an officer of the Order of Canada, and he's logged more than 13 million kilometers in space. So please welcome Dr. Dave Williams.
Well, thanks very much. I'm really excited to be here and share the magic of human spaceflight. You've all heard the possibilities of the opportunity. Get your Visa cards out and, send the email to Virgin Galactic and enjoy the ride. But I've been very fortunate to have had the experience of flying in space twice. But more importantly, we're here to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Magellan's voyage. 3 years to circumnavigate the globe. An absolutely unbelievable mission at the time. And you fast forward 450 years later, 1969, we're sending humans to the moon. We go from 3 years to circumnavigate our own globe to 3 days to be able to get to the moon. An absolutely incredible mission where humans first set foot on the moon, casting eyes back upon the Earth, seeing Earthrise from the lunar horizon, an absolutely spectacular moment. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd actually become an astronaut and have a chance to fly in space at 25 times the speed of sound, where you orbit the Earth every 90 minutes, seeing a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes. And I remember being on the flight deck of the space shuttle, climbing on the exercise bike, and actually I had a chance to cycle all the way around the world in 90 minutes. It was really quite incredible. Some people think they're fast cyclists. I did the whole world in 90 minutes. Anyway, when you're out in space, you have a totally different perspective on the Earth. And if any of you in the audience ever have a chance to go to space, obviously I highly encourage you to go there and to achieve what we call the planetary perspective, looking back at our planet from such a unique environment, understanding that there's no boundaries separating countries that are visible from space. In space, you see planetary change taking place. I had 9 years between my first and my second space flight, and I could see changes on the planet that took place in that 9-year time period. And we come back recognizing that all of us, every human that lives on the planet, we're all in this together, and we have to figure out solutions to the problems that are confronting us. My first space flight took place in 1998, an absolutely dramatic mission focusing on understanding how the brain and nervous system adapted to being in space. And of course, because we can do this, in the space program, we like to recognize global leaders here on Earth. So we took slides, histologic specimens from the collection of Santiago Ramón y Cajal, a Spanish neurohistologist that won the Nobel Prize in 1906. We took these slides with us to space to signify the scientific contributions of neuroscientists worldwide. So it was an incredible mission. That's me back in the back with a mustache, and back in the mustache era and things. You can evaluate the before and after if you like, but you get to space and you realize there is no up and there is no down in space. It turns out we're very egocentric when we arrive on orbit. Wherever our head is, we perceive as up. So if I'm in space in that position looking at all of you, I would say you're all upside down, you're sitting on the ceiling, and in fact I'm the one that's correctly oriented. But these are some of the unique things that we find when we live and work in space. My second space flight took place in 2007 when I helped build the International Space Station, arguably the most complex piece of technology built in the history of the human species. And the most important lesson that comes from the International Space Station is international collaboration. The major spacefaring nations of the world all came together from different cultures, different backgrounds, speaking different languages, and we built the space station on orbit, bringing these components together for the first time in history. It was truly remarkable. My job was to be able to help build it and repair some of the sections, so I trained in my white spacesuit, getting ready to go outside and do spacewalks. We trained for a couple of years before liftoff, and it all comes together the night before you go into space. And imagine this. Okay, we've all had amazing experiences on Earth, but imagine you're going to go to sleep on Earth and wake up in space. That's absolutely incredible. So here, it's the night before. So in this situation, we're actually walking around the base of the space shuttle, and then we woke up the next morning, and it was incredible, and I'm thinking, wow, this is going to be amazing. Tonight, I'm going to sleep in space. It's an absolutely incredible ride. But some of you might be wondering, what's it like sitting on top of a controlled explosion, going from being stationary to traveling 25 times the speed of sound? It's an absolutely unbelievable experience. To save you Googling this, 25 times the speed of sound is 5 miles a second or 8 kilometers a second. You snap your fingers and you go 8 kilometers. I personally have traveled 8 times faster than a rifle bullet. So let's see what the ride is like.
Minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, go for engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour, expanding the International Space Station while creating a classroom in space.
Roger, roll, Endeavour. Houston now controlling the flight of Endeavour. The space shuttle begins its journey back into orbit. Endeavour rolling onto the proper alignment, heads down, wings level for the 8.5-minute ride to orbit, taking aim on the International Space Station for docking on Friday. 30 seconds into the flight, the 3 liquid fuel main engines will soon throttle back to 72% of rated performance in the bucket to reduce the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier. This view from long-range trackers, now from a camera on the external fuel tank showing the bird's eye view of Endeavour heading towards space. 54 seconds into the flight, Endeavour already 8 miles downrange, standing by for the throttle up call from Capcom Chris Ferguson.
Endeavour, go with throttle up. Go at throttle up.
The throttle up call acknowledged by Commander Scott Kelly, joined on the flight deck by pilot Charlie Hobaugh, flight engineer Rick Mastracchio and Tracy Caldwell, Dave Williams, Al Drew, and Barbara Morgan seated down on the middeck, Morgan racing towards space on the wings of a Legacy.
Wow, every time I see that, I want to go do it again. Anybody want to come with me? Oh, come on. There we go. We've got a few hands. It's pretty amazing. So you get to space 8.5 minutes later. 3 days later, we rendezvous and dock with the International Space Station, and then we get ready for the spacewalks. When you go out the hatch and do your spacewalk, we have 2 people stuck in the hatch, and the only way we can fit them in the airlock is to be able to have the people oriented head to toe. So the first person, the lead spacewalker, goes out head first, and the second person, the other spacewalker, goes out feet first. My first spacewalk, I went out feet first. My second and third spacewalk, I was the lead spacewalker and went out head first. The big difference is if you go out head first, you see the world above you. It's amazing. If you go out feet first, you're looking 400 kilometers down, kind of like, it's an amazing view. So let's have a look and see what this is like. Now, I have to tell you, this is not from my mission, because the last time I flew in space, it was in 2007. We had really low-res video cameras and things. So this is actually from Randy Bresnik, an American astronaut who was doing a spacewalk in 2017, because he had a GoPro, and he got 4K footage spacewalking. So let's see what this view is really like. So you can see how that would definitely get your attention. The view is compelling. It's absolutely unbelievable. You're working away on the space station. You look over your shoulder during a spacewalk and you see the northern lights dancing over a quarter of a planet. It's an absolutely spectacular view. My second spacewalk, I spent roughly 6 hours riding on the end of the Canadarm to install a gyroscope on the space station. This gyroscope weighs 650 kilograms. I'm holding it in 2 hands, moving it around without any difficulty at all. It was truly an amazing moment, and as I was going down to the payload bay of the space shuttle to pick up the new gyroscope, this is the view that I had. And I'm looking at this view going, it's absolutely incredible, a 4.5 billion-year-old planet upon which the entire history of the human species has taken place, looking out in the black, infinite void of space. It was an unbelievable image, and then I thought, somebody should take a picture. So then I realized, I've got a camera. So I swing this camera up in front of me with my hockey mitt space gloves. I kind of point it in the general direction, push the button a couple 100 times to get a good picture, and then I'm really thrilled to capture this amazing view. Years later, NASA publishes a book on the space shuttle program. It's called Wings in Orbit. I get my copy of the book in the mail. The front cover is my picture. So I'm going, wow, this is incredible. So I turn to photo credits. It says, photo credits, NASA. I mean, really, come on, guys. It's like, I was there. I took the picture anyway. You know, sometimes you have to make a sacrifice for the whole thing. But let's see what it's really like being in space. The dream of yesterday is the hope of today and becomes the reality of tomorrow. And tomorrow will bring missions back to the moon. We'll have humans back on the surface of the moon at the south pole of the moon by 2024. NASA's announced that these will be collaborative missions with the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, and all the other international partners participating. It's going to be a really exciting time. But I think what's really more incredible is thinking about other people in the room today who may become those astronauts of the future who will go to the surface of Mars and live and walk on the surface of Mars. And I love this NASA poster on the evolution of a Martian. And we go from robotic rovers launched by JPL and going out there and exploring the surface of Mars to then having humans living and working and walking on the surface of Mars. When we go to Mars, the search for aliens will be really interesting because we will be the aliens. We will be coming from Earth to live on another planet in our solar system, and that's pretty exciting. So here we are in 2019, 500 years after the anniversary of Magellan. Where will humans be in our solar system in another 100 years? And I think that's a really remarkable question because someone else from this room may in fact become an astronaut in the future, voyaging either back to the moon, onto Mars, and hopefully 100 years from now, we, the human species, a major spacefaring species, will further explore our solar system. Thanks very, very much for having me. You can read about all this in my book, but it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you very, very much.
You know, I was just asking Dave, every time they cut to a space section, there's all this like deep bass music and all that other stuff. So I was just wondering whether that was the music from his iPods or you hear that music in space. But Those are the kind of stories you hear at the Explorers Club. One of our members once said when he walked through the doors that it was like Harry Potter. It was like Hogwarts for adults. When you go in there, you hear the most amazing stories. Most astronauts will tell you that they all started in a pool or in an ocean as divers. Our next speaker, Dr. Beverly Goodman, is a National Geographic explorer, an outstanding geoarchaeologist, and she'll explain to all of you what that is, an underwater archaeologist, and an expert on how climate has affected civilizations. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Beverly Goodman. We may have a slight equipment failure here.
Dangerous steps. Those are very dangerous steps. So good afternoon. It's quite an honor to be speaking here today and to be part of this whole event and listening to all these inspiring talks. I'm going to be talking today about marine archaeology and its contribution to understanding our world, and specifically how it might even save lives. Now, marine archaeology, many people immediately think of shipwrecks and treasure under the water, but it's actually a very wide range of research that includes anything submerged that has some sort of human relationship. So we could be talking about harbors, we could be talking about past villages. I'm dealing with this whole realm of change along a coastline. But today I want to talk very specifically about this life-saving aspect of marine archaeology. So let's start with this. I want to talk about fear. Why are we afraid of things? Or why are there some things that we have this innate primitive sense of fear when we see them? And this is a really important thing because it's part of our brain telling us, you're in danger, you need to watch out, you need to change what you're doing somehow in order to protect yourself. And this is a really, really important and critical part of our world. In the past, this would have been what would save lives. It would save ourselves from getting into dangerous situations. Well, sometimes in our world, there are things that we should be afraid of and we should feel very fearful of, but it's simply not part of our makeup. It's not part of how we're wired. And so it takes time, and we have to learn. We have to be told that this is probably an unsafe activity. And we learn, and sometimes governments have to make laws, and this is kind of how things transition over time. Well, on December 26th, 2004, I woke up in the morning, as I usually do, and found out through the news that there had been a major earthquake in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and that this had produced a tsunami that affected, what we'd learned finally, affected 22 nations, and nearly 250,000 people lost their lives in the process. So this is a terrible thing. And the photographs that came out after this were probably one of the things that was most alarming. Why was it so alarming? This very famous photograph that was taken on the day of the event, you can see people on the beach enjoying themselves, looking at this strangely low tide. They're not afraid. Why should they be afraid? They have no reason to think they should be afraid. Of course, the next sequence of photographs, you see suddenly the brain caught up with the information. So researchers, of course, you had all of the rescue coming out and trying to rebuild the area, and there were also a lot of sedimentological, geological researchers that came to see what did this tsunami do and what did it look like afterwards. And one of the things that was so amazing was that turns out as they were looking at these surface sediments, it wasn't the first time that this had happened. In fact, they were able to find many other deposits from past periods that these tsunamis had occurred over and over again. Now, this was not something that they were really aware of across the population, across the governments didn't have this kind of awareness, but there were some areas in the region where they had very low loss of life, and interestingly enough, these were areas where you had native peoples that were living in traditional societies where the stories started to come out that when this event happened, people were noticing changes on the water, they ran to the elders said, oh wait, yes, there was this story, and they actually managed to tell everyone to get away from the coastlines, and in those places they had lower loss. Ultimately, governments all over the world got together and decided to find ways to prevent this loss of life, and drill programs, signage programs, training how to respond and how to be prepared in advance should this ever happen again. And so in the future, hopefully you won't have this situation where people are standing on the coastline. Well, I'm going to give you now another storyline, an alternative storyline, which unfortunately didn't have to have this loss of life. I'm going to take you to a place called Caesarea. This is Caesarea on the eastern Mediterranean in the modern coastline of Israel. And it's very famous for this ancient harbor. And that illustration is probably something of what it would have looked like 2,000 years ago. And today, most of this harbor is submerged underwater. If you want to go and see it, you need to get on your dive gear. You need to get into the water in order to see all the features of the harbor. And the geologists, the historians, archaeologists, over 30 years have been investigating it to try to understand why is it underwater. Was it a tsunami? Was it an earthquake? Was it destroyed deliberately? So I was part of this team, and as a student, we always talked about the construction, we talked about earthquakes, until one year we came across this really unusual deposit, and the deposit had a whole mixture of items, things coming from the deep sea, from the land, mixed up together with shell and pottery, and when we looked at the age of this thing, it turned out that it actually had the same age as a historical record for a tsunami in the region. Well, we brought this information out and we said, we think we have a tsunami deposit. A lot of people said, I don't think so. Mind you, this isn't a place where they have historical records, but there was still a lot of doubt. So I went out and said, okay, you know what, maybe they're right. The archaeologists say they haven't seen any tsunami deposits. The geologists say, okay, but we don't know. So we went out and decided we're going to take a whole bunch of samples. We're going to go out and take biopsies. We're basically going to go offshore, go to places where we have these archaeological sites, and even go beyond the archaeological sites. And as you can see, we put this pipe into the ground. It's very much like collecting a sample from a tree, where we're looking for these tree rings. We're looking for this sequence of events in the past. Because once we collect those cores, we can open up in the lab, and you'll see in a moment here, after we successfully get it out. And we can try to understand, okay, when did these events happen, how many of these events happened, and what do they look like? And you'll see here in a moment, as we open it up. And sure enough, in these cores that we're taking both far offshore and north and south of the original deposit, we ended up finding this repeating itself over and over and over again. And not only was there that one event that we had seen originally, but in fact we'd found a whole series of events, and were able to sort of map out or see this sequence where we have these different events. And one of the events has the same age as the eruption of Santorini. We also see things that correspond with earthquake events. And so it turns out that we're looking at a coastline that's quite prone to earthquakes. But it was still bothering me because the archaeologists said, hey, that's really cute and all that you found this thing underwater, but we've been working here for 10, 20 years. We've never seen a tsunami deposit. Well, not being one to sort of take things at their word, I thought, okay, how would you know that you're seeing a tsunami deposit? Because when you're working on an archaeological site on land, on the coastline, what are you going to find? You're going to find sand, you're going to find shell, you're going to find pottery. What are you going to find in a tsunami deposit? Sand, shell, ceramics. So I realized here that this might be an issue of knowing how to see what it is that you're expecting to see. So I started to go through all of the reports and the photographs, and sure enough, I started to see over and over again this pattern where a lot of the things that had already been excavated did in fact have some of the fingerprints of these events. But a couple years ago, one of the places that we'd actually published and said, we think this is a good spot. This is a place where there's probably one of these tsunami deposits. They started to excavate it. I got this phone call, we're opening up the area that you published will have a tsunami deposit in it. And I thought, oh no, this could be very good news or this could be very bad news. So headed out there to see the excavations, and here you can see it's on the side of the harbor. And they started to excavate, and up in the surface of this deposit, you have a floor. And floors are awesome because they can tell us a really, really good date, and this floor happened to be from somewhere around the end of the 8th century. They opened it up, started to go down, and it was a really unusual deposit because it was a huge sandbox. Wonderful sand, stick your feet in it, play with it, and it was so fine and uninterrupted. It didn't have garbage in it. The only things that we could find inside of it were actually the large stones that were part of the construction of the walls. So we're looking through this, there's no garbage, nothing like a construction deposit, but what we're seeing are these big blocks that are like floating inside the sand. And when it's floating inside the sand, what this means is either they had to delicately put this in as they were filling it with sand, and one block here, one block there, and cover it and add another one, or it all came in together. And from what we could tell, all the signs pointed towards that this came in one mass movement. So they continued to excavate. We took cores, just like we did offshore, to get good sealed and closed samples of this deposit. And as they moved towards one end of this room, we started to see these blocks coming together. So you can see here, you have all of a sudden this articulated wall, these stones that are starting to look like something. They're starting to look like a wall. Finally, as I got down to the bottom of the room, we see these collapsed columns. Now you might say, okay, this is your disaster layer, right? Actually, no. These collapsed columns were covered in soils full of garbage and food remains and ceramics. It turns out that this room, it was abandoned. It was abandoned long ago. It had all kinds of garbage and things in it, and above that abandonment layer, then you have the sand, and then you have the stones. So now we have our sequence. We have this upper floor, which is in the late 8th century. We have the sand and stone layer in the middle. And on the bottom, we have this abandoned floor that gave us a date in the early 8th century. So we only have about a 50-year window. And when we go to the historical record, boom. Major earthquake, tsunami records offshore, 749 AD. So one side of the room, nothing's happened to it. The wall is intact, looks great. Other side of the room, sometimes we have the base, sometimes we have nothing. And as we started to look at the whole site, we were able to map this out, and you can see really nicely this sort of directionality of the destruction. It's all coming from one side of the room and collapsing into the room, and those floating stones I was telling you about, they were excavated out at the time that this photo was taken, but you have to picture that pile of stones would have continued, but they just would have gotten higher and higher as you went into the room. So this is a really unique situation where we can see where this wall collapsed in, and we can take a look at it and sort of from all dimensions and start to reconstruct what the motion was of this wave. Super, super, super cool. We're seeing, finally we can turn to the archaeologists and the geologists and say, come look. And I called everybody from every institution to come and see it and said, okay, let's talk about this. And everyone looked and said, yeah, that seems to be the case. We are in fact looking at something that we can't explain in any other way. So here we are coming in from the harbor just to give you a sense of where it is relative to the offshore destruction of the harbor. We're going over the site right now that was all filled by the tsunami deposits, and then turning around and looking at where this wave would have come in. And I also want to mention that the word tsunami itself actually means harbor wave, okay? So and one of the reasons is because the worst destruction that you get is right on the harbor. Now, this is all interesting from a sort of academic level, and isn't it novel and isn't it great? But as all this information is coming in and we're building up the story and realizing that there are a whole bunch of tsunamis happen here, hold on a second. This is a place where people live. This is a place where the beaches along the Mediterranean coastline become packed in the summer times. We've really got a problem. And fortunately, after all of that time of sort of naysayers and what have you from the academic community, a commission was put together by the Israeli government. They took a look at this data, unbeknownst to me, mind you, it all came as a bit of a surprise, and immediately, well, near immediately, about 10 years after the discovery, they were one of the 10 years. It's not like the astronaut programs, they would say 15, 20 years from now. At the time, it felt like forever, but when it happened, now it feels like immediately a few years later. In any case, they decided to take that data and they made the decision that tsunamis would be part of the emergency management program in Israel, be part of how children are taught, and also a signage program all along the coastline in Israel. Now here in Portugal, of course, especially in Lisbon, you have this history. You have the 1755 event, you have earthquakes, you have the tsunami, and it's all of these countries coming together and using this past information in order to protect people and to make sure that, as was said earlier today, disasters are really a social phenomenon. It's about how it's reacted to or how much you're prepared for it in terms of what the actual outcome is going to be. And this kind of information can really make a difference. So here I am with the Police and Emergency Response Commission during one of our last drills. And because of this information and all the work of all these people, Israel is actually becoming one of the leading groups in putting together national drills, and is being now, other countries are coming to Israel to see how they're doing it and to build their own programs. I found this photograph from that drill, and I've been told in the past that I should stop smiling when I talk about tsunamis. That it's kind of disconcerting. But I'm not going to stop smiling when I talk about tsunamis. And the reason I'm not going to smile is because when you're finding a way that you can turn this thing away from being a disaster, it's something to smile about. So it does make me very happy. And here I am with the UNESCO group on the shorelines of Israel, explaining the data, showing them deposits that we've found and describing it so that it can be used for other training programs throughout the world. So I want to say something really quick just to close about this issue. Climate change, coastlines changing. 1 meter of sea level rise will increase the damage and the risk related to tsunami and storm events by over a 50-fold cost. So these events, even though some of them might be relatively rare, maybe once in a generation, 4 generations, 6 generations, we're at a point where the consequences aren't the same that they were 100 years ago. They aren't the same as they were 2,000 years ago for sure. We have coastlines around the world where you have urban population growth, cities that didn't exist 60 years ago because it was uninhabitable. You couldn't have tall buildings with air conditioners. And now you have full cities in places that aren't always even aware of their tsunami risk. If I take Israel as an example, where they have a beautiful historical record and they were still resistant, imagine places today that have coastlines that didn't even have populations in the past to keep a record. So we're in a situation where these past records, just as the dinosaurs tell us about the state of our planet, these past records are very important for us to figure out what we need to do to help reduce these dangers in our own future. So, thank you.
Our next speaker has been named among the Forbes 30 Under 30. Christine Speeton has made underwater exploration available to everyone by developing the Blue Eye Robotics underwater drone, right here next to me. She's currently the co-captain of Entrepreneurship One, and from Norway, I give you Christine Speeton.
Is my mic on? Yeah. I'm going to put this little fellow just on the tip here so you understand what I'm talking about. This is Blue Eye Pioneer. I was 4 years old when I fell into the ocean, head under, eyes wide open. I was faced with this world that was hidden below the surface for the very first time. And today, I can still recall the blue-green colors, how the light was different, and how the seagrass was moving slowly around me. And I remember feeling somehow safe and calm. That was at least until I was pulled up by the hair and brought back on land safely. Ever since that day, though, I've been drawn towards the ocean. And I've been spending every possible moment that I can in, near, or by, or on top of the sea. And for the past 3-4 years, I've been living on my own sailboat back in Norway. So now I believe that there's two kinds of people in the world. There are those who love the ocean, and then we have those who haven't fallen in love with it just yet. Clearly, I belong to the first kind, and I am determined to empower people to take part in this exploration of our last frontier, with the underlying mission to mobilize an army of ocean guardians worldwide. Because I believe that by enabling people to see with their own eyes, to explore, to view, and to learn more about the ocean, they will naturally connect with it and care for it as well. And that's what our ocean needs the most today, is that we care, each and one of us. So, 4 years ago, I co-founded a company called Blue Eye Robotics, developing underwater technology, enabling people to view and to explore the ocean and share our ocean experiences in a whole new way. With a Pioneer underwater drone, we can access a part of the world that up until now has been kept available only for the professionals. Underwater drones, practically, are not much different from the aerial drones in the way that we control them with a simple game controller, and we get live video up to our smartphones or tablets. But this one can go down to 150 meters below the surface. And if you put your smartphone into the digital dive mask, you get a fully immersive experience and feel that you are really down with the fish below the surface. And unlike the aerial drones, this isn't about taking cool selfies on your ski trips or seeing something that you've already seen only from a different angle. These drones allow you to go places that no one has ever been before. This photo, by the way, is John Romney. He is the head of the Great Barrier Reef Legacy, where they currently use our drones. And on this specific dive, he was discovering growing corals at 80 meters depth in what was declared to be a dead zone on the reef. So which opportunities are revealed when we get access to the underwater world? And what difference does it make to the ocean that more people will get the opportunity to enter? Well, by making the ocean available to everyone, we give people the opportunity to get a greater and deeper understanding of our ocean, and this is where my army of ocean guardians come in. So back in 2015, I went on a mission on the X Expedition, a 72-foot sailboat, together with 13 female scientists, artists, and explorers. And we were crossing the Atlantic Sea from Senegal to Recife in Brazil. We were on a mission to investigate the connection between marine litter and plastic and people's health. Every day, we would trawl the ocean surface for microplastics. And we would take water samples that was reported back to a still ongoing research project. And this journey also turned out to be the very first big milestone for Blue Eye and my company, as of course, I couldn't go on this mission without bringing my underwater drone. So we worked day and night, my team and I, to make the very first prototype, and we managed just in time, 10 weeks after we founded the company, and just in time for my flight to Africa. But arriving in Senegal, I had to go and get some equipment at the local DHL office, which had been sent separately. And I was having a struggle, both because of language issues, and I believe that they wanted some money from me to give me the equipment that I needed. So I spent over 6 hours trying to explain to these guys why it was so important for me to get this equipment. I mean, we were going on a mission to save our oceans, after all. And what finally convinced these 4 men that this was urgent was when I started to show them YouTube videos. I showed them some videos of corals and marine wildlife in their local backyard in the ocean just off their coast. And these men, they didn't know how to swim. They didn't know there was a world full of life below the surface. And then I moved on and I started to show them videos of how these corals are suffering the threat of plastic pollution. And all of a sudden, one of the guys stood up and ran out and came back with my package and said, well, here you go. Here's your equipment, here's your package, and here's our phone numbers and emails, and please keep in touch, and please save our oceans. So at this point, Senegal didn't have a proper landfill. The Big Blue was their only trash bin. It's only earlier this year that President Macky Sall has declared zero tolerance for littering in Senegal. And this might seem like a small victory in the great picture, but it is a symptom of a changing global mindset. So plastic in the ocean is the largest environmental challenge that we're facing today. And we know that most of it ends up on the seabed, making it really hard for us to find. However, this is not a plastic problem, is it? I would argue it's a people problem, or more specifically, a social economic problem created by us, which means that it can be solved by us as well. And that is why this is my favorite environmental problem, because it's so tangible, and even though nobody can do everything, we can all do something. And Blue Eye is one example of technology that gives us the opportunity to contribute. Because however you want to use the underwater drone, whether it's to play, or it's to map marine litter, or it's for professional inspection work, your findings and your data will give us information to make better decisions in the future, for the betterment of our oceans and for the betterment of our planet. Because I believe it's really about what's out of sight is out of mind. And if you think about it, when we look up at the sky, we can't avoid seeing the stars and the sun. And that triggers curiosity in us, and I believe I'm talking to the right audience here. Because for some people, that curiosity is so powerful that it drives an unstoppable motivation to find the answers to what's out there. My only wish is that we can have the same motivation in search for sea stars or sunfish, or corals, shipwrecks, trash or treasures, or all the other things we don't know anything about that's hiding below the surface. I want to tell you about the Entrepreneurship One, where I am a co-captain on what we call a pay it forward platform. To do exactly what I'm talking about, to make the unseen seen. Together with founder of the most successful startup in Norway, Kahoot, we started by refitting his old sailboat, which was an X-yacht with an electric engine. And then we began to invite people on board together with us to really harness the fact that we are all in the same boat. And today we have a fleet of boats and ships, entrepreneurs, investors, politicians, even the royal kingship is on our fleet. And we all come together to solve the greatest ocean challenges. Entrepreneurship is also a great metaphor for business, because it can't be taught in school, and just like sailing, you only learn it by doing it. It's all about building strong teams. It's about enjoying the journey, and it's about preparing for what's to come and adjust the sails at the right time. So to take care of something, we need to understand it, and understanding starts with seeing, and often in the mindset of an explorer. The planet is our home, but the world is something different. The world is founded upon our ideas, beliefs, and visions, meaning that at any point we can change the world by creating new ideas. So let's make sure that we all have access to the tools we need to explore and to generate new ideas to create the world we all want to live in. Thank you very much. You can take this.
I was hoping that was going to be a gift.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. I have to admit, I grew up on the water, and you're always wondering what's beneath it, and that's, I think, what a lot of times gets us all diving. So today we've been talking about anniversaries. Do we have any wedding anniversaries? I'm just kind of curious, are there any birthdays out there? Somebody mentioned they had a birthday to me. There we go. We have an anniversary or birthday? Anniversary. Okay, great. Well, it's also the 500th anniversary of the Magellan Elcano expedition. In 2.5 weeks, we're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of man walking on the moon. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But it's also the 20th anniversary of Bertrand Piccard and Brian Jones' first circumnavigation of the Earth by a hot air balloon. I remember I was at our annual dinner 2 weeks later when, not even 2 weeks later, maybe it was a week later, when Bertrand came to it. More recently, Bertrand is known for the Solar Impulse, the first solar-powered plane to go around the Earth. That's a pretty amazing feat if you think about it. We're talking now 100 and something years after the first plane just flew a few hundred yards, the idea that you would not need fuel. So these are amazing accomplishments. I think a lot of times when we talk about great explorers, we talk about the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century. And if I were to pick a person that I felt represented the spirit of exploration beyond any person, if I could say who I would like to be, it's the honorary president of the Explorers Club, Dr. Bertrand Piccard.
Good afternoon, everybody. When my grandfather, Auguste Piccard, in 1931, was the first man to go in the stratosphere, and by the way, was the first to witness the curvature of the Earth with his own eyes, his goal was to prove that human beings could travel in high altitude, above the bad weather, in thinner air, where the airplanes would need less fuel. So by inventing the pressurized cabin, he opened the way to modern aviation with the concern of being more energy efficient, to protect the environment, less fuel consumption. One generation later, when my father, Jacques Piccard, together with my very dear friend Don Walsh, became the first man to touch the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 1960, the goal was to see if there was life down there in a period of time. You can think it's really crazy, but in 1960 it was like this. The governments wanted to drop the radioactive and toxic waste in the deepest trenches to get rid of it. And the big question mark was, is it some life down there or not? And when my father and Don Walsh saw there was a fish, that was the proof that there was oxygen coming from the surface to the bottom with currents and countercurrents. So by seeing some life at 11 kilometers down, it was the message given to governments, don't drop anything in the deepest trenches, it will pollute the entire planet. So these are the examples I had as a child. Scientific exploration is there to protect the environment, to be useful to humankind. So as the third generation, of course, I'm always told it's normal, it's genetic, it's in your blood, and you have to continue. I continued, but I don't believe it's genetic, and I don't believe it's in the blood. I believe it's in education. Imagine, if it's genetic, it means I can transmit this spirit only to my children, it's not enough. It needs to be able to inspire absolutely everyone. And I think the education of an explorer is to raise curiosity. It's to stimulate pioneering spirit. It's the taste of the unknown. And why that? Because each time that we are in our comfort zone, we find no performance, no creativity. We will never invent anything new because we're happy of what we have. But explorers are people who are not satisfied with what they have. I think that's the basic of explorers. They are not satisfied with the status quo. They want to go into the unknown because they understand that the unknown is a fantastic stimulation to learn more, to create. And to create what? To create a new state of mind. To always want to understand more and always try to be more in interaction with ourselves and with others. So as a child, I was fortunately allowed to ask questions all the time. I was a nightmare for my teachers because I never accepted to do anything if I did not understand why I had to do it. But this develops a state of mind where you are just willing to understand the world and not only understand what people teach you. Because the modern education is about teaching knowledge. It's about teaching what science has proven. This is not creating the explorer state of mind. But when my parents were telling me, I don't know how to answer your question, that was stimulating the wish to discover more. And I was thinking, great, that's fantastic. The adults don't know the answer. It means there is still something to learn for me and for the next generations. So this taste of exploration is never ending. It's always trying to go beyond the paradigms, beyond the borders, beyond the unknown. And I think I became motivated by having a compass in my heart where the needle was not showing the north, it was showing the unknown. And each time there was something new in my life, I tried to discover it. So when there was a first hang glider flying in Switzerland, I thought, I'm going to do that. First microlight, I'm going to try that. First ballooning experience, I said, I'm going for it. I think I tried almost everything except drugs. Because drugs is not worth it. But beside that, each time there was a new opportunity, I tried it. Until I fulfilled my personal dream. It was to fly around the world non-stop in a balloon with Breitling orbiter balloon exactly 20 years ago. That was maybe, in terms of being the third generation, the way to be free from the two previous generations. To show that I could also do something that had never been done before, a big first. But it was not clearly useful to others until the end. Just the end. At this moment, I understood that I had burned 3.7 tons of liquid propane, and there was 40 kilos at the landing. So at this moment, I understood that it's not the sky that is the limit, as people say. It's the fuel that is the limit. And I thought, let's now do it without fuel. How can you circumnavigate the world on a solar-powered airplane? And this was for me the way to contribute, as my father and my grandfather did, to the protection of the environment. To show that clean technologies and renewable energies can achieve absolutely impossible goals, like flying day and night, almost perpetually, in a solar-powered airplane. So you imagine the situation, you are alone in your cockpit, you can fly several days and several nights in a row, and you are just thinking, I'm in the future. There is no noise, there is no fuel, there is no pollution, and you think it's a science fiction, and you think I'm exploring the future. And actually not. It's not the future. You know, it is just what the technologies of today allow us to do today. And at this moment, I understood how much the rest of the world is in the past. The rest of the world is in the past with very old, outdated, and inefficient infrastructures and technologies. And this is causing depletion of natural resources, pollution, climate change, waste everywhere. The world is in the past. And today it is urgent to bring the world from the past to the present in order to be able to use all these solutions, all these new technologies. And explorers have a huge role to play in this new adventure. Because it's not only about exploring new territories. Today it's about exploring new solutions, new ways to think, new ways to act, in order to fight poverty, in order to promote human rights, to promote health, education, better governance, sustainability, protection of the environment, of biodiversity, quality of air, quality of water. You see, it's huge what we can explore. So you are here listening to explorers, and you might think, exactly as I did when I was a child, what can I explore? Well, exploration is not what you do, exploration is how you do it. It's a state of mind. Each time you are in front of a certitude, of a paradigm, of a knowledge, of a habit, you have to understand that it's an obstacle for you to become an explorer, for you to become useful to others, useful to the world. So you have to break the paradigms. You have to say the certitudes were maybe okay until now, but not from now on. And you have to go beyond absolutely everything that is taken for granted. You have to go around every common assumption and say, how can I think differently? What are new ways, other ways of doing? Exactly like on this picture here. That's the last picture I did when I flew around the world with Brian Jones 20 years ago. It's a porthole, a window of the capsule of Breitling orbiter, and it's frozen by the moisture of the night that has put big ice crystal on the glass. And on the other side, you have a rising sun. But you will never see the rising sun if you don't first go through the ice. And this is a symbol of what happens in our life. In our life, we have problems, we have difficulties, we have crises. And very often we're afraid to go through the problem, to address the situation and solve it. So we see millions of people who prefer to suffer in the ice they know instead of taking the risk to go through the ice and see the light on the other side. So each time we're facing a problem, we have to decide, is life trying to destroy me, or is life trying to challenge me to become an explorer, to find new solutions, to find new ways of thinking? And what I find amazing as an explorer is the fact that what we deeply need is not courage, it's confidence. In courage, of course, you need a little bit of courage. You need to fight your fear, you need to be able to do what you want to do. But much more than that, you need confidence. And you find it. Because when you're outside of your zone of comfort, you have so much more access to your own creativity and performance. When I was flying at night across oceans, alone in my experimental solar-powered airplane, I felt better than in any other moment of my life. Why that? Because I was in touch, in relation with the human resources I had inside of me, all the potential, everything that can help me to solve problems. And this is what I advise you to do. Try to find these situations in life where you are obliged to use the crisis to transform it into an adventure. There are a lot of situations like that. Even when you are studying and you have an exam, It's a moment like that. All these moments that can stimulate us to be better human beings, more performant, more creative, and more useful to others. This is what I wish that you understand when you talk to explorers, in order to be explorers also, explorers of your life and a better life for humankind. Good luck to all.
Thank you, Bertrand. Wow. Wow. You're an inspiring guy. Bertrand's going to be leaving us very soon to head out of here to the airport, as with a few other guys. At this time, I'd like to have Don Walsh, also a former honorary president of the Explorers Club, join me. Bertrand is the honorary president. I'd also like to have Alan Stern and Dave Williams, who I know are all leaving. The reason I'm asking them to stand here, beyond having my picture with these incredible men, is that one of the objectives of coming to Lisbon was to come together, exchange ideas, but also sign a declaration of how we feel. I'm going to read you the Explorers Club Lisbon Declaration. It's simple, it's short, but I think it represents everybody here. We pledge our commitment to exploration in the pursuit of scientific understanding for the betterment of humanity and all life on Earth and beyond. We treasure our planet, its life, and respect the cultures that inhabit it, and dedicate our efforts to mitigating climate change, preventing the extinction of species and cultures, and preserving the health of our lands and oceans. So I'm also hope later on tomorrow at City Hall, all the rest of the explorers will be signing this. But I hope this is a pledge or commitment that resonates with all of you as well. So Bertrand, if you could sign here.
You know, I think it's a beautiful text.
Thank you.
Beautiful words, and I think we have not only to sign it, but to applaud it.
Okay.
I really love what is written there.
I'll hold it. Which camera are we on? Is it, I don't know if you can see it. Oh, maybe this camera here. Is this, can you read this? No? As he quickly tries to get his focus. Okay.
We have to sign it.
Yeah, let's sign it.
Everybody has to implement it.
Okay.
This is important. If it's only a signature, it's not going to change the world. But everything you heard in this text, you have to implement it. You have to do it in your daily life. This is really important.
Bertrand?
Yes, thank you.
Here. Honorary President. Yeah, use our pen. The first man to the bottom of the ocean to live.
Coming back is the trick.
Yes.
That's ocean engineering. Going down, no problem.
Right here.
Gravity. Here? Okay. How's that? Okay. So moving.
Explorer Alan Stern, right there.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And astronaut Dave Williams. And Chairperson Ann Passer. Thank you for doing this.
I would also like to invite everyone in the audience before they leave today to sign this document. Thank you all.
Thank you. I need you guys to sign those other ones for Day2 as well. Oops. I'll be back.
Hello again. Paul Miller, also known as DJ Spooky, is the first artist in residence with Google Arts and Culture, and he is also a National Geographic explorer. His music, which you'll hear in a moment, is inspired by his voyages in Antarctica, and we are thrilled to present to you DJ Spooky.
First and foremost, I just want to say that is a hard act to follow. Wow. So just by way of quick introduction, my name is Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky, and I'm a writer, artist, and musician based in New York. And let's see. Oh, that sound. There we go. Okay. So there should be an image behind me. Yeah, there we go. So what I want to do today is give you guys a sense of what goes on when you think about pattern recognition. And if you think about even what Bertrand was just saying, for example, maps and the idea of travel, such as Magellan opened these portals for Western European culture, they expanded the idea of the vocabulary of the time. So today what I want to do is to walk you guys through what I think about when I look at contemporary art and its relationship to exploring. So behind me, this is from 1972. It's one of the most reproduced images in the world. It's the blue marble from 1972, the Apollo 17 space mission. But for me as an artist, one thing I want to do is go back 500 years to Leonardo da Vinci. This is a map that he drew of a battle scene for Imola, for Cesarea Borgia. The Borgia family, you know, the Medicis, these guys were pretty intense, I'll leave it at that. But Da Vinci was able to kind of draw a map of this city that they were about to invade. And the Duke of Borgia needed a better battle plan. So what they ended up doing was creating this kind of what you call axonometric representation. Now, what's fascinating about this is you fast forward 500 years to Google Maps, aka, you know, what's going on now, you can see that Da Vinci was able to imagine the city before there were satellites. Now, if you think about 500 years of perspective, going from the blue marble to that map from 500 years ago, it's all about perspective. Now, to me at least, what's fascinating as we move into the 21st century is that we're now in a data-driven society, and that data is literally one of the most important facts of modern life, and it's, again, based on how we use these tools that are available to us. As an artist, I'm very intrigued with this idea of a new palette, being able to think about and reimagine these ideas of how we renew the imagination. So for me at least, the imagination is the most renewable resource. This is something that I'm going to kind of circle back to over the next couple minutes. But if you think about 2015, 2019, and go back a little bit earlier, I'm going to show you a big hero of mine, a gentleman by the name of Alan Turing. He's generally considered to be the father of modern computing. And much of the material I was just showing you is made possible by his inventions and his interventions into what we think of as sort of computational realism from the 1940s during World War II. He was able to decipher the Germans' codes, and the sort of war between the Germans and the Americans became the modern computer. One could argue that that kind of asymmetric relationship allowed us to actually think of information and warfare as kind of different maps of different terrains, much like Da Vinci was doing 500 years ago. But the reason I'm intrigued by Alan Turing and I'm bringing him into this conversation is that he essentially opened up the doors for modern computing and allowed us to kind of begin to think of computers and mathematics as part of the everyday life of a data-driven society. But he coined the term biomorphogenesis. So, for example, when you see a pattern, this is our Milky Way, for example, but once you have the actual mathematical description of that pattern, you're able to kind of go from micro to macro. So, for example, this is a storm with the same pattern, and our fingers also have the same pattern. So biomorphogenesis is one of those kind of things about pattern recognition that the human uses to navigate the world around us. So too with music. Now, I'm here because I took a studio to Antarctica and went to several of the main ice fields and was generating a series of music compositions based on the geometry of ice. Now, when I was there, I was doing photography, and this project eventually went to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and went to many museums around the world. But I was thinking mostly about the notion of how history, layers, and sampling and collage kind of work in the arts context, but looking at climate data, because we're now in a hyper-accelerated climate change, and the human being is now moving the planet into the Anthropocene era, and so that means that the arts are even more important than ever. So today I'm going to play a composition based on the geometry of ice. When you see the geometry, you can easily see a hexagonal shape, 6 sides, and there's a kind of an involution that happens whenever you see it, because it's the changing same. It's the same material, same equations and formulas, but unfolding in nature. So as an artist, I'm fascinated with this from the landscape point of view, because if you look at painting, sculpture, again, I was showing you Medici at the beginning, the Renaissance allowed us to have new perspectives, what they call zero-point perspective, and at the same time Magellan was doing his voyage, Medici was changing the way we thought about the perspective of the landscape that I was showing you earlier. So we're now in a landscape of data, and that means nature and art are always kind of in this strange kind of dance. So you're seeing the same thing mathematically here. It's just folded in on itself. So as an artist, this really intrigues me. Now, in terms of African American culture and hip hop, which is where I come from, I'm very downtown New York. For me, at least, going to Antarctica was to challenge my sense of composition and landscape. So African American culture, this is one of my favorite photographs from the 60s. This is a gentleman by the name of Iceberg Slim. I can assure you there's not too many icebergs in LA. But he would take photographs of himself sitting on these huge piles of ice. But he influenced a lot of hip-hop artists. And in African-American culture, amusingly enough, you have people like Ice Cube, Ice-T. If you got the white guy, you got Vanilla Ice, you know. And so to me, at least, the sense of humor here, you have the poetic and you have the scientific. So the piece I'm going to play for you, coming up in a moment, is based on the equations of this gentleman, Johannes Kepler. He's generally considered to be one of the first prototypes for modern scientists. And in 1611, he was on his way home, and a snowflake landed on his sleeve, and he was stunned by the sense of pure mathematics and the geometry of the ice. And he went home and wrote a series of equations called 6 Sides of a Snowflake, which is generally considered to be one of the first mathematical treatises about geometry in nature. So music and math are reflections of the same phenomena, patterns. So to me, at least, there's a very famous phrase that I want to kind of use as a reference point here, and that's from this gentleman Leibniz, who essentially says, music is the pleasure the human mind experiences from counting without being aware that it's counting. So I want to show you a composition based on the mathematics of climate change. The material you're about to hear is called Check Your Math. If I can invite Carla to the stage. She's a wonderful Portuguese violinist from Lisbon. Thank you. Right. Okay. This piece is called Check Your Math, and it's based on Johannes Kepler's material by way of downtown New York. So if we can get you ready, and you're going to play for a little bit, and then I'm going to start sampling you through the software I developed. Thank you. So I'm just going to assume it's not every day that you hear a DJ remixing Leibniz, Johannes Kepler, and hip hop, but just putting that out there. So what I was talking about earlier when I was thinking about maps and the idea of expanding the vocabulary is a pretty simple situation. When I was in Antarctica, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that the landscape had this immensity that as a New Yorker, you really are struck by the human intervention in this way that you're made to feel that human beings are just this speck of dust on the planet. And the planet, if you think about billions of years of time, the geologic sense of time really dwarfs any human intervention. So as we move further into the Anthropocene era, one of the most powerful tools we have is language and its ability to give us new spaces to explore. So Magellan, what he did with maps, what he did with expanding the horizon, I think right now we need to understand that humans can actually intervene and change our own behavior. We need to upgrade and update our ability to interact with so many of the issues that we've actually created ourselves. So when people say we need to save the planet, I actually like to say the planet will be here. It's the most resilient system that we can imagine. Regretfully, our imagination has the burden of hyper-consumerism, capitalism, all sorts of things that are degrading and destroying the environment. So when you think about the planet itself, the human being is just one species of many. So when I was in Antarctica, I wrote a series of essays in a book called The Book of Ice, and I worked with a very renowned quantum physicist by the name of Brian Greene, who has a best-selling book called The Elegant Universe. And again, it's about mathematics and nature. To me, at least, if we understand pattern recognition, we can change the patterns. So human behavior, you start thinking about patterns and the idea of how people create all the issues around us. This is where art can help us reimagine those worlds. So the installation I did was hosted by Robert Redford at Sundance. We had a wonderful series of, again, concerts. And eventually, one of the largest ones was we had at the Metropolitan Museum, based on, again, the geometry of ice in a room, much like this, where I did a series of these kind of art happenings around climate data. Eventually, I made an open source album called Of Water and Ice, which I'm going to play for you in a moment. But what I want everyone to kind of take away from this experience today is that data, the arts, and exploring are not mutually incompatible. In fact, they help enhance the experience overall of whenever you travel. So to me at least, traveling in sound is one component of today's discussion. So when you start to think about art, science, and technology, I'll just give you an amusing, this is Apple Maps, and I hope not that many people are using it, but this is a map with a lot of bad data. So amusingly enough, when you start to think about how people navigate, this is a bad example. So I'm going to leave it at there. But from the other sense of humor here, when you start to think about science, art, and technology, most people don't think of nature. But one could argue nature itself is a kind of technology that human beings are just struggling to learn. We're biological-based species, and above all, we need to have tools that allow us to better engage that. So the Greeks named the Antarctic because it was opposite of the bear, Arcturus. If anyone speaks Greek, Arcturus was simply a constellation in the north that they used to navigate the waters, the Mediterranean. But they named it, but never went there. They never went to the North Pole, they never went to the South Pole. But they had the language and the idea of poetics to describe a landscape they had never visited. So whenever you think of the Arctic or Antarctic, it's actually a poetic sensibility. To me, that's incredibly important as we move into the 21st century. So one of the inspirations for this piece that's called Of Water and Ice is a conversation between a scientist and a poet, who many of you may find familiar. But at the end of the day, this is where we ended up having my concert when I got back from Antarctica. We had almost 1 million plus people. This was during Earth Day. And so what we did was we had, this is where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, and it was one of the largest Earth Days in history. Many people protesting against some of the policies of our American government. But we had probably more people than Trump's inauguration. I'll leave it at that. And so, to me at least, this is where you have the culture of our time being able to say, we demand change. We demand that we can have a world that has sustainable and renewable energy, and that above all, the culture will open the door for that. So to me, at least, what you've been seeing and hearing today is a whole bunch of catalysts, people that I think are helping us move, like Magellan, to open the horizon to new possibilities beyond fossil fuels, beyond all sorts of the issues that are plaguing our society. In June this year is the hottest year in history, by the way. So these are things that are extremely important to the conversation. So like I was saying, one of the earlier pieces that inspired me, and then we're just going to play this and wrap up, is a conversation between two of my favorite folks, and that is Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore. So these gentlemen met backstage at the Nobel Prize Awards, and what ended up happening is Einstein was in the middle of finishing up his equations for the general theory of relativity, and whenever he would have a writer's block, he would go and play violin. So I got into a conversation with Rabindranath Tagore, who's the first Indian poet to win the Nobel Prize, and a lot of early Indian poetry is based on Sanskrit mathematics. So the two of them ended up writing a book together called On the Nature of Reality, again, about physics, art, and poetry. It's a really great read if you ever have a long flight. So this next piece, what you're going to be hearing is a woman singing the geometry of ice that I'm sampling, and we decided it would be fun to repurpose some of the video footage for the Global Explorers Club. So this next piece of Water and Ice, you're going to start, and then we're going to start sampling, and the video it should come up as well. So you ready? Thank you. All right. So, thank you, Carla. That was amazing. And we just met 2 days ago, so she's amazing. I just want to say it's been such a pleasure to work and see all the different explorers talk about their narratives and the stories that inspired their work. What you've been seeing is a composition based on what I call an acoustic portrait of natural phenomena, ice. But I have different styles, and sometimes I do big music festivals. Sometimes you guys are getting the art mix. So usually I would be DJing and there'd be, I don't know, thousands of girls throwing their bras on stage or something. It happens. But so the fun part about today is you guys are seeing all these different perspectives, which I think is a critical, important issue right now, is to compare best practices, how we can make the arts and the culture respond to this idea of expanding the narrative. So again, in the spirit of Magellan and in the spirit of New York, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with you. Everything you were hearing today was open source because Antarctica is the only place on Earth with no government. So I made the entire project remixable, and it's called Of Water and Ice. So if anyone out there wants to remix it and be able to kind of have fun with the data, we worked with a group of scientists from Dartmouth's Cold Regions Research Labs. So all of it is available and open and kind of fun. So I'll just have this for 4th of July, we can remix America. There we go. All right, thank you. All right, great.
I think you followed that act just fine. We're going to be back here at 3 o'clock. We're going to have a shorter lunch break. I understand that we are slightly beyond our timeline, but serious exploration and serious music and art really deserve our attention. We have a fantastic lineup for the afternoon, and I very much recommend that you come back. So have a good lunch.